to set you up or to make me feel even more nervous than I did before. But if that was the intention, it did its job. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today. My name is Kirsten, and that's Leah. Before I get going on the talk, though, I have to warn you a little bit that I have absolutely terrible hay fever. And that means two things for us today. The first is that I'm really drugged up, so who knows what I'm going to remember. And the second is that I might start sneezing. It's quite early in the morning to suggest a drinking game every time I sneeze, but we are at a BBD event, so I think it's fine. Right, so that's Leah. She has a background in watching people play and make games. She's very good at it. And I'm Kirsten. I have designed and developed games, both analog and digital. I was a game design lecturer at Wits University. And I've also consulted on gamification projects around the world. And most of them were terrible. Really, really bad. Today I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to show you hopefully a way to do it a little bit differently. I come from a company called Two Name Games. That's us four co-founders there sitting playing games at our dining room table. And at Two Name Games, we aim to solve complex problems by designing for human nature instead of against it. But before we dive in today, I'm going to kick us off with a brief moment of play. So I know we're at a conference and you will put them on silent, which I appreciate. But do me a favor and pull out your phones, please. And when you've got your phone open, I would like for you to open up your gallery and find a picture. It can be any picture that you want, ideally safe for work, because the people sitting next to you might peer over your shoulder and have a look. Any photo that you'd like, once you've got it open, leave it there. And your job for the next 2 minutes, so not very long, is to play with that photo. There's some people coming in. There's a few seats here in the front and on the side over there. So your job is to play with the photo. However you want, color, light, doodles, stickers, whatever you want. It's about playing, it's not about perfection. On the screen, there you go. There's a screen recording of me editing my photo, which is a photo that I took inside of a car driving next to my brother and his son riding their bicycle. You can see in my video, I'm playing with the light. I up the brightness, I lower the brightness. I decide I want a higher brightness, so that's where I leave it. Play with exposure. You're not trying to make this look like a magnificent photo. You're really just playing with it. So don't take too long making a decision, make a choice, and move on to the next thing. Once you're happy with your crop and your light and your color and your mood, you can go and add some really fun details. You can grab a pen and make marks on your picture. You can add stickers. My phone, when I draw things, converts my drawings into stickers, and I don't know how to turn that off. Hopefully you do know for your phone, though. Okay, you'll have about 30 more seconds to play with your photo. When you are done with it, please don't forget to save your photo, because we are going to come back to it. If this photo is important to you, make sure you save a copy so you don't lose your original. How are we doing? Have we got lovely, wonderful, colorful photos? We're getting there. Okay. I'll give you about 15 more seconds. All right, my video is done, which means you all have to be done. I'm very sorry. You didn't know we were racing, but we were. So what you've just done, making choices in a relatively playful context, we are at a conference, we're at work, but it's playful enough, is what we're going to be talking about today. And that's really important to me, and I'm going to tell you why. A few years ago, I was consulting on a gamification project. You're going to hear that phrase a lot today. The project was for a multinational logistics company, so people who send things all around the world. And they wanted to increase productivity, particularly for their picker packers. Now, the picker packers are the people who pick the items off the shelf and pack them into a box. That box then gets transported for actual packing. So when you get 7 boxes from Take-A-Lot for 3 different items, that's the second step in the process. The first is the picker packer who gets the 7 items into a little trolley. The brief was very simple. They wanted to increase productivity, and that means more orders packed and processed in an hour. Very straightforward. So we came up with a narrative world, a story, and as players or picker packers, the workers met objectives, completed their targets, they would unlock new parts of the story and they would earn rewards. Very typical gamification stuff. Wonderful. During one of our sessions with the client, where we were planning this all out and refining, I asked a question, which at the time I really did think was an innocent question. I asked, do these workers earn enough money to have good food that will fuel them for a very laborious, physically demanding job? Silence. I asked a second question. Do they all only have this one job? Or are they not making enough, so they all have to have second jobs to supplement their income, which leaves them really exhausted by the time they come to this work? More silence. Luckily, it was a virtual room. So I wasn't confronted with the people that I was meeting with, but it was very silent. It was very awkward. No one answered the question, and we moved on. I learned quite quickly that that was not the kind of question I'm supposed to be asking in these rooms. And I realized then that we were optimizing for metrics, very cool, very important, but ignoring the really fundamental foundational barriers to actually completing good work. And over time, I did a lot of these projects. It was a dark time in my life. I noticed a pattern. We were consistently being asked to make people compliant, usually with systems that were not designed to set them up for success. Gamification had become a way to avoid solving real problems by putting band-aids onto broken bones. There was a moment where this really became very important to me, and it's actually the last project that I worked on. I was about 25 years old, so still quite young, not quite at that downhill moment that Lucky spoke about earlier. And I was interviewing bankers, particularly relationship bankers, for a behavioral competency program at one of the largest financial institutions on the continent. A woman, one of these bankers, walked into the room ready to be interviewed by me, and it was abundantly clear that the woman was knackered. She was absolutely exhausted, overwhelmed, and I was yet another thing she had to do in her day. I started explaining our project, full of positivity, completely naive, but positive, talking about the learning journeys that they were going to go on, the kinds of rewards that they would have access to. And she interrupted me. And the question that she asked me, it haunts me still 6 years later. Is any of this going to help me, or is it just going to add more metrics that I have to hit? I had no answer for her. I was totally shocked. I had no authority to address the issue that she had, either with the client or with my own supervisor. And later on, when I went back to meet with him that day, I told him what happened, and he said, that's not part of the brief. So we carried on. I felt absolutely helpless to the harm that I knew that this program actually might end up causing. And that's the moment that I realized that gamification wasn't just often ineffective, it could actually be actively harmful. That moment was a really important catalyst for me. The following year, I ran a research project at the university called Meaningful Gamification with myself and a group of honors students, trying to see, is it actually possible to do gamification meaningfully? Broadly speaking, the answer was no. A few years later, I co-founded a company to name games with the express desire to do it differently. We wrote the Gamefulness manifesto. Manifestos might be trendy, but for me, it was very important that we very clearly demonstrate what it is that we're rejecting and what it is that we're embracing. Because every time people ask me what I do and I explain we do playful solutions, they go, oh, right, cool, gamification. No, we don't do that. We rejected gamification. We rejected points, leaderboards, badges, the kinds of things that pit workers against each other and force them into compliance that doesn't serve them or the business goals, actually. And instead, we embraced what we call gamefulness. It's not my term originally, however, we have co opted it. Thank you, Sebastian Dietering. And there we design for the things that actually make games such excellent forms of media and art. And those are meaningful choice, agency, and the safety to experiment and fail. So when we wrote the manifesto, it was important that we be specific. Cool, we know what we're rejecting, and that's great, but what are the specific things that we're embracing? And we came up with 7 principles, which I'm going to go through now. These 7 principles are not just the foundation of our company, but they've also become a really fantastic diagnostic tool. And I'm going to show you what I mean. Principle number 1, play is a human right, not a productivity hack. Yes, great. Can play help us be productive? Absolutely. I am not denying that at all. However, when we only use play to extract labor out of people, we actually lose out on what play really is defined by, which is firstly being self-directed and self-motivated. When we play, the means are more important than the ends. Play relies on our imagination. And most importantly, you cannot be forced to play. You have to opt in. It's quite literally impossible to be forced to play. So we believe very strongly that play belongs everywhere. And this principle is the guiding principle for all the rest of our principles. Principle number 2. This one might ruffle a few feathers, but we believe that meaning lies in mastery and not in metrics. The image here, I know that on the left it's supposed to be like city buildings, but I thought it kind of looked like a bar graph. So that's why I chose that picture. Often at work, in companies, we are obsessed with measuring people and performance, whatever that performance is, instead of focusing and directing growth. We know that people are driven by purpose. They're not driven by points. And so true motivation, we really believe, comes from being in an environment where you're being encouraged to grow and to learn, not hit KPIs. So you can ask yourself, am I tracking completion rates or am I measuring the depth of my understanding of this problem? Are we measuring how many story points have been completed, or are we considering how many problems have actually been solved? Principle number 3, failure is the engine of progress. Now, when you play, it is quite literally impossible to fail at playing. So earlier when we were editing that photo, now maybe what you might have failed to do is find the edit button on your phone, but that just means you haven't started playing yet. There was no outcome that would mean that you had failed at playing with that photo. It's impossible to do. But not only can we not fail when we play, when we do fail, not at playing but at other tasks, that is the best way that we can learn and grow. Many systems that we engage with at work and in our lives punish us when we fail. However, we know that games in particular teach us to embrace risk and to learn from our failure. There's a fantastic book called The Art of Failure by Jesper Juhl. And in that book, he speaks about how games want you to feel inadequate. And then they give you all of the support and the motivation that you need to keep trying until you're able to complete the level, defeat the boss, whatever it is. So are we optimizing for catching errors, or are we optimizing for learning? Do people feel safe admitting when something didn't work at work? I hope they do. Principle number 4 is that the struggle itself is the reward. Games are an act of striving. If you think about Snakes and Ladders, which might be the most universal game, I don't think anyone here is still playing Snakes and Ladders, but I'm sure you know it. The objective of the game is to get your piece from position number 1 to 100, right? The easiest way to do that is to pick your piece up and put it on 100. Congratulations, you're done. But that's not very fun, is it? No. No, the struggle of hoping to land on a ladder so you can go up, the disappointment when you land on a snake and you have to go down, at least for a toddler, is thrilling. And that's what games are really about, is totally voluntary attempt at unnecessary obstacles, because those unnecessary obstacles actually are deeply pleasurable. It's where we grow, we learn, we see the results of our experiments. So you can ask yourself, are you genuinely removing obstacles, or are you just making things artificially smooth? Principle number 5, collaboration beats competition. I strongly believe that leaderboards divide, but shared missions unite. My husband challenged me on leaderboards last night when I was doing my little speech for him. And he said, but Kirsten, you're very competitive. You like competition. And I said, yes, but a leaderboard is different. Imagine you've got 10 people on your team on a leaderboard. Person number 1 feels great. They go, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing a good job. I feel fantastic. Person number 2 and number 3 feel motivated to try and beat number 1. What do you think number 9 and number 10 feel? Do you think they feel encouraged, motivated? Do you think there's any sense of shame or embarrassment among their team? And now, what about that middle group? I'm a middle child. I know what it is to be forgotten. They're just kind of sitting there in the middle. Are they doing a good job? They don't even know. Leaderboards, I really, really strongly feel, are not just unhelpful, but they can be actively harmful. So I want you to think about the difference between individual rankings versus collective targets, working towards something as a group. Or if you're at BBD, what's the difference between a code quality competition versus a pair programming culture? How does those two things motivate people differently? So for gamefulness, we really prioritize collective creativity and completion of targets or goals over individual rankings. Number 6, this is the big one, at least for me, after all of my harrowing experiences as a gamification consultant. We empower, we don't manipulate. It's not my job here to lie to you, to get you to do something that actually doesn't serve you. So what's difficult about empowering people is you're then giving them agency, the ability to make meaningful choice. And when you do that, you're giving them the power to say no. And so empowering people means that you trust them to say yes, to say no to the things that work for them, to the things that they know will best suit and serve them. Gamefulness absolutely rejects coercion, and instead we design for autonomy, because that's when people really come alive and do their best work, and not compliance. The final principle is that play should not be confined to games. We often think, especially as adults, that we can play when we play a game, and we maybe play when we do sports, and that's about it. And that's absolutely not true. We should be looking for ways to embrace curiosity, experimentation, and joy in our boardrooms, our classrooms, our workflows, our morning commute. All of this might sound a little bit woo-woo to you, or like the act of play or gamefulness is just distracting from the very real, serious, important work that you have to get done. So let me throw some science at you. When we play, it develops a protein in our brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And what BDNF does is it grows and differentiates our neurons. That's what allows for neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the feature of our brains that allows us to grow and learn throughout our whole lives, not just when we're children. So the act of play literally makes you smarter. And if that's not convincing enough, let me tell you about your play circuits in your brain. So the subcortical part of your brain, which is right down over here, is the oldest, most ancient part of our brain. So as humans went through evolution, so did our brains. They got bigger, they built more and more. The circuits that are activated when we play are sitting right here above your spine. And what that tells us is two researchers, Panksepp and Brown, tell us that play is one of 4 core survival traits that we have as humans. We need 4 things to survive. We need sleep, we need to eat, we need shelter, and we need play. In particular, we need play because it makes us better at finding food to eat and securing shelter. So play might seem frivolous and it might seem fluffy, but the science will strongly disagree with you. So these principles are all fine and well, and I seem like, oh, such a very good person standing up here telling you about them, but how do we actually use them? Well, at Two Name Games, one of the things we do when we receive a brief is run it through a manifesto audit. Is this brief actually in alignment with the principles that we aim to achieve? So, principle number 1, which, as you may recall, is that play is a human right, not a productivity hack. Will this serve people or just extract more from them? Our second question, what would genuine growth look like here? Would failure here be informative or would it be punitive? Would it punish us? Are we removing meaningful challenge or pointless obstacles? And does this bring people together or rank them against each other? Can people change direction or can they approach this differently? And finally, are we creating space for experimentation and curiosity? A little while ago, an NGO approached us at Two Name Games to make a game. Fantastic, we love making games. The brief was a little complicated, and this is a direct quote. We want a game that will end gender-based violence. Okay? 100% alignment on the goal, absolutely. We're with you there. However, that's not going to happen. No game in the world is just going to end gender-based violence, right? We need to address systemic poverty, social structures, the legal system. And yes, games can help us do that. But I'm very sorry, my little board game that goes into grade 10 classrooms is not going to end gender-based violence. And the question that the client asked us really came from a place of believing that games can be these magic solutions, right? But they're just a band-aid on broken bones. However, we did tell the client that we could do something for them. And we did. What we created, so this was a game for high school students, was a game that would allow them to practice collaboration and clear communication. They worked together to understand, unpack, and relay difficult concepts to each other. And they were allowed to fail to understand these difficult concepts, things like consent, respect, in a safe environment that was protected. So we see some of our gamefulness principles emerging in our final design. We allow them to find mastery over these concepts instead of punishing them if they don't get enough points. They're allowed to fail in a safe space. They struggle. We make them read the rules and teach the game to each other and themselves, and that in and of itself is quite an accomplishment. We make them collaborate with each other, and we empower them to have the kinds of conversations that they need and want to have. When we move from game as a solution to game as a practice space, we're able to optimize for empowerment instead of meeting outcomes. All right, so we have our philosophy and we see it demonstrated here in this example, but wouldn't it be nice if the philosophy was a practical tool? Well, do I have good news for you? We've created a method. for what we call gameful design. So when you design something gamefully, and the method is called explore, discover, create. It is what it says on the box. First you explore, then you discover, and then you create. So this is a flexible, repeatable method that we developed for what we call playful inquiry. What it does is it unlocks insight, it shifts perspectives, and it's going to help you start experimenting with change. I'm going to prove it to you now. Do me a favor and pull out those photos that you edited earlier. While you're pulling out your phone, I'm just going to explain each of the three things in a little bit more detail. So when we explore, we're opening up the space of possibility. We're asking questions, examining possibilities, and looking at it from new and unexpected angles. It's really important when you're exploring to resist the urge to leap into solutions. It's very hard for me. But really to stay focused on asking, what is this all really about? Because when we do that, we can design for genuine inquiry and the answers that come from that instead of predetermined or preset outcomes. The second step, which is to discover, there you are realizing what's really going on by noticing patterns, surfacing relationships that reshape how you understand what the actual challenge is. And this phase is really where we shift from kind of open-ended play and wondering into making sense and gathering kind of coherent thoughts. And the final step is to create. You're creating. And really here, the gameful approach really shines because each thing that you create is a small prototype, an attempt, a test to see what happens. We don't expect it to work. If it does, fantastic. And if it doesn't, also fantastic. We're going to learn something either way. Right, so you've all got your phones out, fantastic. So what I would like you to do is explore your photo. So do that by just taking a look at your edited photo. Try with new eyes. Obviously, you've seen it before, but really have a look at what's in that photo, see what you can notice. What do you notice now that you didn't the first time you had a look at it? Is there anything there that's surprising to you? Anything that's maybe a little bit odd? At this stage, we're not looking for answers, we're just asking questions. Okay, so now we've explored the photo. Let me tell you about my exploring. So this is a photo of my brother and my lovely sweet nephew riding on their bicycles, and I'm in the car. And there's a few things that I noticed. The first, without meaning to, my edit makes the photo look a little bit more vintage. The second thing I notice is that my nephew is actually looking up at my brother. I didn't notice that the first time. And the last thing, and it's hard to see on the screen here, there is evidence that someone else is in the car with me, which I had forgotten about. My guess is that it's my sister, but I can see her t-shirt poking in there in the seat in front of me. Cool, I've explored. Now let's discover. So here we're going to reflect and we're going to think about what we noticed and how what we notice might connect to other parts of our life. Really, the data that we pulled in Explore now becomes our insight in Discover. So I want you to think about what this photo tells you about you, your work, your life, your relationships. And if this photo were a metaphor for any of those things, what might it be telling you? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Okay. So I realize, I know this about myself, but I am reminded, thinking about not noticing that my sister was in the car, that's something I do at work quite often. I forget that there are other people in the car with me. There's 4 of us co-founders. I don't have to do everything by myself, but I sometimes forget they're on the journey with me. And so that's what I'm thinking about when I think about this photo. Cool, so now we are going to create. Obviously, we're not actually going to make a prototype here and now in this room, but we're going to start planning it out. So the action really lives here in this create phase where we turn insight into intentional change. And again, these are just prototypes. They're attempts, they're experiments, doesn't matter whether or not they work. So I want you to think about how that metaphor that you were thinking about now, how that could turn into one small action that you could take into tomorrow, into the next week. What's something that you could try that captures or addresses or responds to that metaphor that you were thinking about? So I'll give you a few seconds to think about that while I blow my nose. But no sneezing yet, sorry. All right, so here's what I've decided. This is my experiment. Each morning next week, I'm going to start my day thinking about all of the many different tasks that I've got that are purely on my plate. And I am going to wonder which of them could do with a second set of eyes. I'm going to practice asking who else is in the car with me. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. Whether or not I actually bring someone on to help me do the work, I don't know. We'll see what happens. All I'm attempting is a small mindset shift. It's a small experiment, and we're going to see what happens when I do. All right, congratulations. You've just finished a loop of the EDC method. Well done. You can give yourself a round of applause. Good job. You did it. Well done. Yay. Cool, but how do you know that you did it like you were supposed to? Well, we've got a list of 9 building blocks of gameful design. And these building blocks can be one of two things. The first they can be is specific features that you use to incorporate into your design very intentionally. But the second thing that they do is they naturally emerge when you are indeed designing gamefully. So I'm going to go through them. There's 9 of them, so I'm going to go quite quickly. The first of 8 is agency. So the ability to make choices, that have meaningful outcomes. The second is curiosity. So having the space to explore and discover. My favorite thing about games is exploring the different and multiple varied paths to victory that one can try and achieve. The third is feedback loops. So getting information back when you make a decision, and ideally in real time. I'll pause here to tell you a brief gamification story. I had the pleasure and privilege of working on Discovery's gamification project 6 years ago when they moved from the one smoothie a week model into the tile flipping model. I'm sure many of you know that. Yes, we're all familiar with Discovery. Cool. So originally, their plan was to have the grid of tiles that you flipped. You flip your tile, you get your points, that's it. The loop ends. And I'm very proud to say that the reason why all of the rest of the tiles are revealed to you is because of me. Because I explained, thank you very much. I explained to them that people don't just want feedback for the choice that they did make. They want feedback on the choices that they didn't make. They want to see what else is there. And they're going to feel cheated if they got a small number, but the big number is never revealed to them. So feedback loops are really, really important. Number 4, constraints. When we have limitations, we are inspired creatively. In games, very simple, it's the rules. Those are constraints, and we operate within them. Number 5 is fictional framing. So any game that has a story to help explain the rules or the mechanics is using fictional framing. Number 6 is safety to fail. We've spoken about failure a lot. Failure is an important, should be celebrated part of the learning process. Number 7, voluntary risk. So you can choose, this is a challenge that I would like to take on. Number 8, mastery pathways. So progress being self-determined and towards a specific goal that that person is working towards. And number 9, collaborative emergence. In game design, we talk about embedded versus emergent elements. So in Snakes and Ladders, what's embedded is the dice, the board, the snakes and the ladders on the board. What's emergent is the temper tantrum that your toddler throws when they land on a snake. So collaboration and the emergence that comes out of that is is the best. Collective creativity. So these are all touch points that will help you ensure that your design, whatever that design is actually gameful. We're going to apply EDC again. This time I'm going to do it by myself. You all did a fantastic job the first time. But maybe you might have thoughts about this, because the scenario we're going to walk through is the age-old challenge of having technical debt while your stakeholder wants new features. All right, I'm sure this is something many of us can relate to. And that constant tension between we need to fix what's already not working and they want new functionality and they're paying the bills. So maybe in this first explore, we don't assume that we know the answers. We don't accept that this is just an impossible trade-off that we have to live with. We know there are other things out there. So we start asking questions. Things like, what does technical debt actually cost us? What does it cost the client? What would developers do differently if they had more influence over the kinds of tasks that were completed? And how are our clients actually making decisions about what's urgent or important to them? We might also go and do some research. We might shadow the developers and see what they're doing in a day. We might map where there are workflow disruptions. Again, really importantly here, we're not trying to solve the problem, we're just asking questions. And in this phase, we're using the building block of curiosity. Then in Discover, we start to see that there are some patterns emerging. Maybe, for example, the client doesn't actually understand how much compound interest is added to this project when the technical debt is not addressed. They just don't get it. Or maybe the developers feel like they never have an opportunity to practice or develop new skills, to work on interesting projects. They're terribly, terribly bored. It's just endless maintenance. Or maybe what you discover is that it's the loudest person in the room who's saying that we need new features. It's not actually the business goals or needs. So here we're starting to see those feedback loops emerge. It's time to create. So we can do some experiments. Maybe we create some sort of a technical debt visualization that shows the client the real cost of not addressing that technical debt. Or maybe you pilot investment sprints that allow your devs to pause for 2 weeks and invest in a new skill that they'd like to learn, coming back refreshed. Remember here, it's important to remember that these are prototypes, they're tests. You don't know what's going to work, but you do know that you can learn something each time. But the fantastic thing about Explore, Discover, Create is that it's a looping and repeating cycle, and you can go through it as many times as you need. So cool, we've got an experiment, we've done the experiment, now what? So let's say we did the kind of visualization, this is what the technical debt is costing us. And it worked. The client understood, grasped, okay, this is a real problem that needs fixing, and pipelines and plans are changed because of that. You don't need to stop there, you can keep going. What if there were other invisible work that would benefit from being visualized in this way? Here we see mastery pathways emerge. So the ability for subject-specific expertise to start to build for members of your team. And then maybe, cool, we know that visualizing invisible work works for one. So now we can try for security updates or accessibility improvements, the kinds of things that are really, really crucial, we all know, but can be very difficult to prioritize. And in this phase, we're starting to see collaborative emergence, different people from different projects and departments working together. And so finally, you prototype an invisible work dashboard for all of the different invisible work that needs to be done across a project or a portfolio or a department. And that helps your team balance debt, features, and other investments that you've made. And here we start to see constraints being emerging, those creative expression being heightened from limits. So that was a very, very quick example of Explore, Discover, Create in the kind of setting that you're all working in. And it really is, I believe, gamefulness in practice, because what it does is it creates conditions for learning, growth, playfulness, curiosity, and experimentation to naturally emerge, rather than just grinding compliance or actually obedience in the workplace. So, to leave off for today, I would like you to all remember that you have more influence than you think. The questions that you ask in meetings, the projects that you suggest, and the way in which you're framing problems is going to shape how you and others around you tackle complex challenges. Explore, Discover, Create, and Gamefulness is not about big, dramatic organizational change, but rather bringing gamefulness to the challenge that's right in front of you right now in slow, small steps. So, do you have a challenging weekly meeting that makes you feel really tired and stressed? Is there a project brief that isn't sitting quite right? Have you got technical debt that needs addressing? You can use Explore, Discover, Create to open yourself up for different approaches. I believe that most of the time, complex challenges aren't complex because of technical difficulty, but rather they're complex because we're not 100% clear on the problem that we're trying to solve. And when that happens, we use the wrong tools to solve that problem. But an approach like Explore, Discover, Create will help you ensure that you're solving the right problem. So you can get playful about new approaches. You can start small, pick one challenge, and just go explore in the next week. Ask questions and see what you notice. To end off, I'm going to go back to the beginning. The title of this talk was Beyond Gamification, Gameful Thinking for Complex Challenges. I forgot the name of my own talk. But I haven't actually defined gamefulness for you today. And that's because I don't know what the definition is. I haven't found one that I'm yet really happy with. I'm a former academic, and academia is all about defining things. So it's a good thing that that's not my job anymore because I'm quite bad at it, turns out. But rather, this is something that I personally and our company is still figuring out. And each time we talk about it and each time we implement it, our understanding grows deeper. There are some things that I know about myself. I know that I need play to survive, not just because Dr. Stuart Brown tells me, but because I know that for me, the opposite of play isn't work. The opposite of play is depression. I also know that games are the best tool that I have to play. So maybe what I'm realizing after doing this talk is that gamefulness is the thing that I need to survive complex challenges. If you would like to try, do Explore, Discover, Create again, I've created a workbook for you. It's 12 pages long, so there's a lot in there. If you're interested, there's a QR code. You can scan it and you'll have it delivered to your inbox. If you'd like to give it a try again. That's me. Thank you so much.